Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's first ever Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference. My name is Dan Sowery with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's preparing for a virtual Ohio EPA inspection presentation with Olin Ackman from our Division of Air Pollution Control, John Schmidt from our Division of Surface Water, and Frank Zingales representing our Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization. We also have experts behind the scenes that will be helping to address questions. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate and engage with our presenters during this afternoon session. On this slide here, you will see a screenshot of an example of an attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this in your computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. For this webinar, you are listening in using your computer audio. If you're having sound issues, click on the microphone button to switch your audio settings. Please feel free to submit questions to the presenters by typing them into the questions pane on your control panel. You may also send questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will address them during the Q&A portion. If we do not answer your question during the Q&A portion, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email along with the session survey. The session survey will also appear once this webinar ends. We value your feedback and would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing, and also let us know if there's anything else that we can do to further assist you. A certificate of attendance will also be included via email about a day or so after the session. This session is pre-approved for 1 contact hour of wastewater operator certification. To receive credit, you must attend this full session, and the session must be the primary window open on your screen for more than 90% of the time. You must also participate in all live chats and polls. This session is also pre-approved for 1 hour of registered sanitarian and sanitarian in training continuing education units. If you did not submit your operator core person ID number or your RS SIT number in the continuing education ID number box when registering, please make sure you provide us that information through the Q&A feature. Attendees seeking American Planning Association credit may do so through APA's self-reporting option. Log into your My APA account and select the self-reported credits option to receive credit. If you're seeking other CEUs, please refer to our agenda available on the conference landing page at epa.ohio.gov/compliance_conference, or visit Ohio EPA's webpage at epa.ohio.gov and click on the 2020 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference scrolling banner at the top of the page. We have also added this as an attachment to this presentation. So if you'd like to see the actual agenda for the rest of the conference, click on that handout. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olin Ackman from our Division of Air Pollution Control. Olin?
Okay, welcome everybody to preparing for an Ohio EPA inspection. It's a little odd this year in the sense that we're having to do this virtually due to the COVID-19, but hopefully you get some information from this presentation that helps clear up any kind of misperceptions about what an EPA inspection is. And hopefully you guys can get the information you need to be in compliance and remain in compliance. So some of the things we're going to be going through today is we're going to give you an overview of the inspection process, specifically what the air, wastewater, and hazardous waste folks are going to be looking for during an inspection. And specifically, we're going to give you some idea of what the inspectors for the air program, water program, and the waste program are going to be looking for, how to best prepare for these inspections. And traditionally, we've always done physical inspections, but now we've got virtual inspections that we're doing as well. And we're going to identify some common violations that we see during the inspection, so you have some insight on those, and give you some do's and don'ts. So a little bit about myself. My name is Olin Ackman. I'm with Ohio EPA. This is my 27th year with the agency, and I spent all 27 years as a field inspector. The last 21 years, I've been working in the Division of Air Pollution Control in Central District Office, and then in our Southeast District Office down in Logan. Prior to that, I spent a little bit of time in the old DUR program working on Superfund sites, and then I also had some time in the Division of Solid Infectious Waste. So this is our first live polling question of the day. We'd like to know how many of you have ever participated in an inspection with the EPA. So type in either yes or no. The results are coming in.
So Olin, will please go ahead and submit your responses once that shows up on your screen.
Okay. It's looking like a lot of people have had inspections with us. That's good to know. Hopefully they've been favorable. Okay. Wow. Most of you guys have gone through an inspection, so that's good. So like I said, I hope a lot of that has been favorable, and hope we've had some good interactions with Ohio EPA. Okay, so it's important to note that Ohio EPA is made up of 5 divisions. Each one of these divisions has their own inspectors. We have our own, and each one of those divisions are only going to be focused on their area of responsibility. So for example, as an air inspector, I'm only going to be looking at those air sources, and I'm not going to be looking at a surface water source. Just like John Schmidt, who's going to be presenting after me, he's only going to be focusing on surface water, and Frank Zingales is only going to be looking at air. However, it's important to note that if like John or Frank are out in the field and they see some black smoke coming out of the stack, they're going to come back and tell me about it. It's also important to note that if you're a larger facility, sometimes you may have a multimedia inspection, so you might have a couple of these divisions inspecting your facility. Also, during the course of the year, you may be visited by one or more of these, especially, and I should note that each one of these divisions are doing virtual inspections. So how are these inspections selected? Well, it's one of 4 things. It's an annual inspection. We get money from US EPA, and as a result of those US EPA grant commitments, they have inspection frequencies that they expect of us. So for large permitted facilities, Title V facilities, synthetic minor facilities, you're going to see us once every 2 years for a Title V facility and once every 5 years for a synthetic minor facility. Large commercial waste treatment facilities, once every 2 years, and large quantities of generators of hazardous waste. Complaint investigations. Ohio EPA gets a lot of complaints from people. They see something that's a concern, pipe discharging something that they're concerned about, a drum, smoke, something smells, they call it in. Significant noncompliance. These are for facilities that are in the process of going through, they've had some compliance issues, and we work with them and probably have a little bit of a stepped up inspection frequency to help them remain in compliance. And then lastly, special inspection initiatives. This is kind of a targeted outreach primarily for mom and pop facilities such as dry cleaners, salvage yards, stormwater controls at construction sites. It's important to note that the inspections may or may not be announced ahead of time. However, with complaint investigations, they are generally not announced prior to us visiting. So the inspection process is going to kind of follow this flow, and it's the same for each one of the divisions at Ohio EPA. And it also is going to be similar whether it's a virtual inspection or a physical inspection. And there's a little bit of a nuance with the virtual inspections now. So we're going to have an opening meeting. We're going to find out, you're going to find out why we're there. Okay, it's an annual grant commitment inspection, or it's a complaint. We're going to do a facility walkthrough. We're going to look at those permitted or regulated sources of pollution. Records review, it's important that you maintain your records because that establishes and demonstrates compliance between the 2 inspection events that you might be having. We're going to have a closing meeting. We're going to sit down with you and kind of go through what we found as a result of the inspection. We'll follow that up with a letter. So you can get a thumbs up, everything's cool, everything looks great, or you may get a little bit of a sideways one, which is a notice of violation, which is all that's doing is identifying areas of improvement that needs to be made. So something new, as I said before, that this year is virtual site visits. Okay, this is a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all unfortunately living through. If a virtual site visit is appropriate for your facility, you'll be contacted by that inspector and within that division. Attached with this presentation is the fact sheet that we generated this year, kind of giving you an overview of those site visits. So what's unique about virtual inspections versus a physical inspection is we're going to have a pre-meeting before we ever do the inspection itself. And the purpose of the pre-meeting is we're going to talk about media logistics. What kind of platform are you using? We prefer to use Microsoft Teams, but are using Google Meets or Zoom. We're going to work with you on what's the best approach for doing this. Also, what time during the week would it be best for us to do this? Is it an afternoon when you have greater broadband availability so there's no disruption in connectivity? Who's going to participate at the facility? And you're going to get an idea of who's going to be participating from the agency standpoint. Documents we're going to go over. Site maps are proving to be very important for us in virtual inspections because it identifies those areas of your facility that are relative to each regulated source of pollution. So it's also important to know where your stacks discharge, where the permitted structures are for air pollution, for surface water, where the hazardous waste storage areas. We're also going to go through what kind of inspection it is, whether it's an annual or complaint investigation or special initiatives that I discussed earlier. We're going to go through contingencies. What happens if a call gets dropped? Is there inefficient lighting, camera movement, noising? So we're going to work through this all together. Photographs. Some of the divisions take photographs like hazardous waste, surface water, drinking and groundwater. They all take photographs as a part of the inspection. This is part of the public. It's part of the public record for these inspections. Information we're going to review prior to the inspection. This is going to be the record keeping, so you'll have to submit your records before the actual virtual site visit occurs. And we might try to do a trial run to make sure that there's no disruption or anything, and then we'll actually schedule the virtual site visit itself. So before the inspection, have a plan, whether this is a virtual inspection or a physical inspection. Who's going to talk to the inspector? Okay, is it going to be you, the plant manager, owner operator? Is it going to be an EH&S manager? Is it going to be the pollution control equipment operator? If it's a public utility, a public entity, it could be a utilities director. I've had maintenance supervisors show me around a facility for an air inspection. They've been able to answer all my questions. Make sure you have a camera at work because, like I said, the inspectors, some of the divisions are going to be taking photographs of certain things during the inspection. Be able to describe your operations, your waste, your discharges. That's particularly important. It's always important, but it's particularly important with a virtual site visit. So be able to tell where that stack goes from an air pollution source to a piece of control equipment, know where the parametric monitoring is on a bag house or a thermal oxidizer, something like that. Be able to describe all that stuff and correlate that to the site map that I discussed previously. Also, know where the environmental records are kept. That's always important, whether it's a virtual inspection or a physical inspection. So when the inspector arrives, find out why the inspection is being done. It should be made perfectly clear to you, whether it's a virtual inspection or a physical inspection, why that inspector is there. It's an annual grant commitment inspection, or we've gotten a complaint, we need to take a look at your facility. Request some identification. All inspectors, I pulled my card out here, should have an ID. Okay, if you want, ask to see this, or a business card. We all carry business cards. We should be able to provide one to you. Hopefully, I've remembered to bring mine. I usually forget those. Take a deep breath, relax. We want you guys to be in compliance. It's one of the reasons why we're doing this presentation. It's important for you guys. It's important for us that you guys are all in compliance. If you don't have an answer for something, just say, I don't have an answer. It's better to follow up with an answer at a later date. So air pollution. This is what I'm going to be doing while I'm at your facility. So some of the air pollution basics that we're going to be going through is, why is Ohio EPA and local air agencies there? I'll talk about local air agencies in a bit. Go through an opening meeting, whether it's a virtual inspection or a physical inspection, facility walkthrough. We're going to go through the permits. Permits are a huge thing for air pollution. I'm going to talk about open burning, common violation, to give you some helpful hints in the future. So Ohio DAPC is unique in the sense that we have both 5 district offices that are responsible for permitting and compliance for air sources, but we also have local air agencies that are doing the same thing. So, and you, depending upon where you are in the state, you may have to work with that local air authority to address permitting and compliance for your facility. So, for example, if you're in Cuyahoga County, you will work with the Cleveland Air Local on your air sources, but then you'll be working with Frank for any waste questions you may have out of Northeast District Office, and John out of any questions you may have for surface water questions. It's important to note that these inspections may or may not be announced. Once again, be open, honest, just answer any kind of questions that the inspector may have. Show us the emissions units. Basically, those are the sources of air pollution that are permitted or regulated by rule. Those are the things that are making you money. Boilers, spray booths, things like that. Control equipment, those are just appliances that are bolted onto the emissions unit for the purposes of reducing or lowering a pollutant. And then record keeping. So why are we there? Once again, US EPA grant commitment. If you're a Title V facility, you're going to see us once every 2 years. If you're a synthetic miner, once every 5 years. Or we've gotten a complaint. DAPC gets a lot of complaints here in Central District Office. I think we average for a calendar year upwards of maybe 800 complaints a year. People see something, they smell something, they have a concern. Or we get a permit application, or we have a compliance report or fee emission reports. It's not uncommon for small mom and pop facilities to get a visit from us because we have reports that have to go out every 2 years requesting what your emissions are. And it doesn't get sent out, so we have to follow that up with a visit. So it's not uncommon. A pre-inspection meeting is going to occur whether this is a virtual inspection or a physical inspection. We're going to discuss the purpose of the inspection. We're going to talk about the facility processes, kind of go through your emissions units and control equipment. We'll review the permit with you, possibly, if you have one, and to describe any kind of records review. Records are going to be discussed ahead of time and provided ahead of time if this is a virtual inspection. Facility walkthrough, virtual or physical. We're going to be looking for visible emissions from either a stack or a fugitive source. And I'll talk about that in the next 2 slides. We're going to talk about we're looking for any kind of off-property odors. That's a little bit difficult to do in a virtual inspection. That's more of a physical inspection. We're going to inspect those emissions units, okay? So that's going to be either a virtual or physical inspection. I said we're going to look at the records. Records are a big component of air pollution permitting. We're going to make sure that everything has a permit and needs a permit. Okay. One of the things we're going to be looking at during an inspection is we're going to be looking at the stack. We're going to be checking for opacity. Opacity gives us an idea of the amount of particulate that you would have in a gas stream. It's also something that you're going to be looking at as well as a holder of a permit. So I'm going to have your permit in hand, and I'll be evaluating compliance of your facility against a permit that has been issued to you. So these are example of 2 stacks. I want to point out to you that you need to read your permit. A number of years ago, I had a facility that facility representative was new to the facility, had come from a facility where they were only required to do a visible opacity reading of a stack once a week. Well, they'd gone to a Title V facility, which required it to be done daily. And the person had just glanced over the permit and hadn't really taken the time to read it, and they had missed the fact that they had to do daily observations as opposed to weekly. So I'm trying to impress upon you guys, make sure you read the permit. Visible stack emissions are basically just emissions that are not going through the stack. If you look at the picture in the upper left-hand side, that's a crusher. They're pretty common. There's a lot of them in use here in the state, but they do require permits and they have to comply with the rules. If you look between the boom of the crusher and the surge pile, you have a pretty good amount of opacity coming off of that. That could be indicative of either a water spray that's not working or it's just not installed. For those of you that are facilities, that working in facilities, you're responsible for unpaved roadways and parking areas. You know how difficult it can be this time of the year with it being so dry and lack of precipitation. It's hard to keep up on top of that. But you're familiar with it. That's one of the things we have to check against in compliance when we're actually at the facility. The picture in the lower bottom of it, all that shows the difference between a visible stack or visible particulate emission versus stack. I don't know if those visible emissions that are shown there are supposed to be going through the stack and that's a malfunction or not, but it's just a difference in visible and fugitive emissions and stack emissions. Paints and solvents, I mean, it's kind of weird how, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is this is something we regulate. So if you're at a facility that uses paints and solvents or adhesives, when you get the paint, solvent, or adhesive, or ink on the surface that you want it to be on, the liquid component of that goes up and through the roof. Okay, the thing that you smell, that's what we regulate. Okay, that's what is permitted in your permits. The other thing we're going to be looking at is control equipment. So my apologies to you out there who have a bag house or a thermal oxidizer or catalytic reduction unit or ESP. There's a whole host of different control equipments that I could address here. But I just want to say that this is one of the things we're looking at, okay? Also, the purpose of this slide does a couple things. One of the things I'm wanting to do here is in the back of the slide, let's imagine that this is a virtual inspection or a physical inspection. Now, in the back of the booth, if you have a spray booth, and these are two three-sided spray booths, as evidenced by the fact that they don't have a third, they don't have a door on them. They're both operating because they have operators there coding something at the time of the inspection. And in the state of Ohio, if you operate a spray booth, you're obligated to have a fabric filter in the booth. So if you look at the spray booth in the foreground, the first one we can see that there's a spray booth there. Okay, or not a spray booth, but a fabric filter that's there. And it's in good repair. So I'll assume that the other booth that we can't see has a fabric filter as well, and both of them are in place. The other thing I'm going to be looking at is the guns that are being used at the time of the inspection. Those are going to be incorporated. They're going to be included in the underlying application, and then that gets all folded over into the permit to install / operate that's been issued for these two booths. The other thing I'm going to be looking at the time of the inspection is like what coating is being applied. Is the coating within the regulatory limits of the permit? Meaning, is it meeting the pounds of VOC per gallon as applied? Also, in the far background, if you look at the drums and things like that, I'm going to be looking at any kind of solvent that's being used, any kind of thinner that's being used. Also, I'm going to be looking at how is all that being recorded? Is it the responsibility of either one or both of these operators to be recording the coding that's being applied and what type of coding? Or is there a data logger that goes back to, say, your office that keeps track of all this? How is all this information being gathered? Because it's an obligation of the permit terms that this be required or this be recorded and kept on top of. So permit records review. In the previous slide, like I said, I'm looking at the paint solvent usage. How many pounds, what's the VOC content of the coating? How many gallons have been used? If you have a fuel burning source, a boiler or a diesel generator or some sort of emission generator, how much natural gas has been consumed? How much diesel fuel has been consumed? Material throughput production rate, this is limitless for Ohio EP, or for DAPC. It could be how many tons of bread have been baked in an oven. How many tons of glass have been pulled out of a glass tank? How many tons of steel have been generated in an electric arc furnace? Basically, what are those production rates? Pollution control equipment, what's the pressure drop across the bag house for pressure drop across the bag house? What's the temperature range for a thermal oxidizer? When was the last time the bags have been changed, for example? When was the last time the burner was tuned in a thermal oxidizer? Condition test results, that's where you have a third party that comes in. It's not very common that this be done in an inspection, but that's where you have a third party come in and they check the stack gas for the performance of a piece of control equipment to make sure that it's within a regulatory threshold for a particular pollutant. So if you guys forget everything about my presentation, if you could remember this one slide, and the importance of this slide is that basically you know where your permits are at. We've got 408 people on this training right now, and I would be surprised if there's not someone on this training right now who holds a permit, but if I were to show up at your facility, you wouldn't know where the permit's located. So if you have a permit or you're in the process of getting a permit, or if you know you need a permit and you haven't gotten around to getting one yet, make sure you have a copy of it, because that permit is what we're using to inspect your facility. So if you're not taking the time to read that permit, become familiar with it, then it's hard for you to determine if you're in compliance and doing the right things. Give you guys an example. I had a Title V facility years ago. Unfortunately, they've closed down. But this facility had a spray booth, and for 2 previous years, they had been reporting and paying for organic compounds from the spray booth. Well, when I was out at the facility, I'd show up. It turns out that they had an electrostatic spray system put in, and they had been using a water-based coating. They had completely eliminated all the organic coating that they had been using. And I asked the facility representative, like, when did you do this? And I said, well, about 20 months ago. It was just right after the inspection. And it's like, well, you guys have been reporting that. And it's like, oh, yeah. I was like, but you've been paying for organic emissions when you haven't had any. So just, keep track of what's going on at your facility. Make sure that people understand, like in the case of the spray booth, if it's the job of those operators to be writing down the coding as applied, make sure that they understand that they need to do that. As I said, I'm using your permit to inspect your facility. So I'm going to be making sure that you're keeping track of all your records. And the great thing about a permit is it summarizes everything. So air pollution is incredibly complicated, but you just have to read your one permit that you have, or maybe multiple permits, but the permits have been issued to you. Those are the things that you have to focus on. The previous slide talked about checking things for permits. So we're going to make sure that, if it has a stack, vent, dust collector, is it using any kind of solvents, paints, inks, adhesives? Are you burning any kind of fuel? Is it dusty, smoky? Does it have odors? It may require a permit. Boilers, for example, we issue a lot of permits for boilers. Everything, permits can be everything from de minimis all the way up to Title V. Stone crushing is pretty common. Paint booths, emergency generators are incredibly common these days. Unpaved roadways, and I don't have it on there, but parking areas as well. Does everything require a permit? No. It could be exempt, be a permit by rule. It could be de minimis. There is a fact sheet that's noted there. Take a look at that. Contact your district office, local air authority. Reach out to them. Ask them, is a permit required? Contact OCAP. They're a great source of information. Okay, so we've got a live polling question. So, is open burning allowed in Ohio? If you think it is, enter yes. Or if you don't think it is, enter no. Okay. Answers are coming in.
We still have responses coming in, so get your vote now. I'm going to close it here in a second. Turn it back over to Olin.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear that some of you are saying no. For those of you that are saying yes, I guess, just be aware that you might be begging for an inspection. Because, as I said earlier, we get a lot of complaints from people. So they see things, and it's a concern. So it's generally, you're not allowed to open burn things in the state of Ohio. Don't open burn things for the purposes of waste disposal. Like to give you an example, like in the spray booth, that little inspection that I was going through, don't pull your fabric filters out of your spray booth and say, well, I got to get rid of these things and take them out and then set them on fire. Because not only is that a violation of air pollution, that could be a violation of hazardous waste. Don't ever, the one thing that will fast track you to enforcement and stipulated penalties in the air program is to open burn for material recovery, like as evidenced in the picture on the left. Don't ever burn for wire, for copper recovery for wire. Okay, that's not ever acceptable. There are cases where you can do some open burning, but before you light anything off, I strongly encourage you to contact your district office or local air authority. Some common air pollution violations we say in our inspections: installing and operating without a permit. Not maintaining records require the permit is probably the single most common violation that we have. Okay, and it's always generally it's administrative violation, but it's pretty common. Exceeding permit limits. An example of that would be the spray booth, for example. Permit only allows you to use a coating that's 3 pounds of VOC per gallon as applied. You have a job come on, that new contract requires performance coating. That performance coating has 10 pounds of VOC per gallon. That could possibly be a permit limit violation. Not maintaining air pollution control equipment. You got busted bags. In the case of the spray booth, it's been operated without a filter in it. And open burning. I want to remind you guys, our goal is compliance. It's not enforcement. I don't know of anybody in DEPC that wouldn't spend time with you on the phone to answer any kind of questions you have, okay, about your permit, to clear up any kind of questions you have. Make your record keeping as simple as possible. No sense of making it complicated. And make sure you develop a pattern for the record keeping and the reports. So when are the reports due? Make sure you don't miss those things. And I cannot stress enough, foster a good relationship with your neighbors. We get complaints from everybody. You take a nice Sunday afternoon, people want to have a barbecue outside, and if they can't sit outside and have a barbecue with their family, because it's smoky or it smells, they're going to call in a complaint. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to John to walk you through the surface water program. Thank you.
Thanks, Olin. I appreciate that. I'm John Schmidt, and I'm going to be talking here about preparing for a surface water inspection. I just need to make sure I get control of the presentation. Here we go. Alrighty. A little bit about me. I am closing in on my 25th year here with Ohio EPA. I spent a good deal of time in our solid waste program regulating landfills at our Northeast District office in Twinsburg. Spent a good deal of time in our surface water program, of course, and I spent a brief amount of time in OCAP. So I kind of worked on assisting small businesses with complying across all programs. And part of that, I spent about 10 years in the private practice before coming to the state. So with that, I want to talk here a little bit about our Surface Water Regulatory Authority. It comes from the Federal Clean Water Act, and the discharge permits come from the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES. You may hear our inspectors reference that quite a bit. Deals primarily with point sources, the classic wastewater treatment plants, industrial facilities like non-contact cooling water, and other discharges of pollutants to waters of the state. Stormwater, certain industries based on your standard industrial classification code, or SIC code, you may be subject to also regulating your stormwater discharges from your industrial areas. Construction sites which disturb greater than an acre, municipal separate stormwater systems. And permits can come in two forms. There are general statewide NPDES permits, of which you can apply for coverage for under our programs by completing what's called a notice of intent for coverage, or you can apply for an individual NPDES permit. We also issue permits to construct something that's known as a permit to install. typically required for things like sewer mains, pump stations, wastewater treatment plants, can also be required for industrial pretreatment systems. So if you are a company that needs to treat your industrial wastewater discharge to a certain quality before it's allowed to be discharged to the municipal sewer system, and you need to build a treatment facility to handle that, that would require a PTI as well. And I do want to kind of note here, just like Olin had mentioned in the AIR program, if you have a non-discharging treatment system that is handling domestic wastewater, toilets and hand sinks typically, that's under 1,000 gallons per day, Ohio EPA may have that particular part of the program delegated to your local health department. So if you are curious if in your county that is delegated to the local health department or that authority remains with Ohio EPA, you're certainly welcome to check with any of your inspectors at Ohio EPA or your local health department on where to apply for those permits to construct. We also regulate indirect discharges of industrial wastewater, which is directed to centralized sewers. Again, like I say, some industrial wastewater is strong enough that it needs to be treated to a certain level before it's allowed to be discharged into the sewer. And our larger municipal wastewater treatment plants may have an approved pretreatment program. Typically, there are larger wastewater plants, typically range in 1 to 5 million gallons per day or larger. The municipal sewers folks may have their own authorized program, but many smaller wastewater treatment plants here throughout the state rely upon Ohio EPA to issue the indirect discharge permits to their facilities that are tributary to their sewer systems. We also have regulatory authority with wetlands and stream modifications. This is a program that is shared with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers under 401 and 404 of the Clean Water Act. And typically the Army Corps of Engineers takes primacy on it, and then Ohio EPA may follow up with a water quality certification. And just like with AIR, we also respond to complaint investigations that are related to surface water. And we're up to our first live polling question. Like, what NPDES permits should you be able to either have available for inspection or send to Ohio EPA prior to a virtual site visit as applicable? Could it be a wastewater or stormwater process flow diagram, trading records for a stormwater pollution prevention plan, a discharging sanitary wastewater treatment plant logbook, stormwater best management practice inspection logs and annual certifications, or all the above? And I'll give you here just a moment or so to see about responding to those questions.
All right, so the live polling question is up. Feel free to provide your response. And no worries, this is not a test. All right, it looks like we have about the majority of folks that have responded. So here in a second, I'm going to close the polls and share the results.
All righty, it looks like the vast majority of you indicated all the above, and that is the correct response. Like I say, depending upon what your NPDES permit has, you may have these things. So if you are have an NPDES permit maybe for your process wastewater discharge, but are connected to local municipal sewers, for your domestic wastewater, you might not have a sanitary wastewater treatment plant and just have industrial wastewater associated with your NPDES permit. But typically, all those could be things that could be required to provide as part of the records. Okay. All right. Now I kind of want to talk here about some common regulated discharges associated with our NPDES program. These can include spent solutions, cooling water, equipment cleaning, rinse waters, municipal sewage, process solutions. Air pollution control equipment blowdown, that's a common one that gets missed. So if you have blowdown from your boiler, that is an industrial wastewater that should be regulated under an NPDES permit if it's direct discharge to the environment. Purge or flush waste, general housekeeping, particularly with the stormwater program, if you've got things that are going on outside that may be in contact with precipitation, as well as floor drains. Sanitary wastewater there on the left is kind of a picture of a typical small package wastewater treatment plant for a industry that does not have sewers readily available to connect to. Another one that commonly gets missed is water treatment backwash. That backwash water from water treatment systems cannot just simply be discharged to the nearest storm sewer without it being regulated, because it will be high in total dissolved solids. Construction stormwater kind of shows there like silt fences at a construction site. If the construction site disturbs greater than an acre, it needs to have a construction stormwater NPDES permit. And then on the bottom right is industrial stormwater associated with those certain industries based on what your standard industrial classification code is. Surface water inspections. When do inspections occur? In our program, if a facility kind of requests a site evaluation to be done, maybe they're proposing to add more employees or add additional processed wastewater, increase their production, change in the wastewater sources or adding more sources. Routinely for our point sources, we tend to inspect our larger facilities more frequently than our smaller facilities. So if you're a major wastewater treatment plant discharger, is then you discharge more than 1 million gallons per day, you may be seeing more frequently, typically at least like every 2 years. If you are smaller than 1 million gallons per day, it may be possibly once every 5 years. More frequently for construction stormwater permits because of the nature of the program, and complaints as needed. What do we look for? Basically to assess compliance with the terms and conditions of your NPDES permit, indirect discharge permit, or permit to install. We look for changes in proposed waste streams like volume or chemistry. Is something has changed out there? Have you changed a process? Are you using something new that hasn't been accounted for you in your current NPDES permit? Treatment plant system modifications. If you're proposing to modify your system, that you want to add treatment components or remove treatment components, that will typically trigger an inspection. Do we do sampling? Under Ohio EPA's program, under the NPDES program, the sampling is typically self-directed and self-reported. Do we do sampling? We do, but it's fairly rare. Typically, we rely upon our facilities to sample in accordance with the permit and to submit the documentation to the electronic discharge monitoring report system that's found on Ohio EPA's eBiz site. If you have problems, please communicate. Communicate is key with your inspector. You know, nobody likes to get blindsided by something. We don't like to get blindsided. You don't like to get blindsided. So communication is going to generate trust and understanding between you and us, and we'll go for a smoother transition. Common program violations include sampling, failure to provide sample results for permitted outfalls. If you have an NPDES permit, and this is a copy of an NPDES permit, it's important to read it cover to cover and know when you're supposed to have sampling and what you're supposed to sample for. Typically, the data needs to get reported to Ohio EPA by the 20th of the month for the previous month. So we just kind of had the deadline here for reporting August data, which just passed us here a couple of days ago here on September 20th. So you don't want to find out in mid-September that you were supposed to collect additional samples in August that you did not, because you cannot turn back time. Failure to ensure proper sampling preservation, type, method, or records and analysis. Failure to provide notification for exceeding permit limits. If you look in Part 3, Item 12 of an individual NPDES permit, there are requirements in there for self-reporting violations when they occur. Making sure that monitoring instruments are calibrated. If you're using handheld instruments for NPDES permit reporting, they're supposed to be calibrated and you maintain records on those calibrations. Failure to have an operator of record. If you have a municipal wastewater treatment plant that discharges like toilet and hand sink wastewater, your NPDES permit will typically have a requirement to be seen by a licensed operator. Many times for the smallest of plants that we have, it may be only seen a couple of days per week. The larger the plant is, the more frequently it's seen by an inspector. But many folks may not even aware that they even have to have a licensed operator see their plant. It may be a condition of an NPDES permit, or it may be a condition of a permit to install. For some of our larger systems that discharge into the ground, we are now requiring them to also be seen by a licensed operator. Notification of a change in operator or a permit holder. If you do change your operator, and many folks contract out with a company to do their operations for them, if you change that, you're supposed to notify Ohio EPA within 3 days of that transfer occurring. Sorry about that. Just had a little glitch here with my computer. All right. All right. All right. Facility walkthrough, whether it's virtual or in person. We're going to want to see permit records and compliance. So we may ask for these prior to the site visit if we're going to do it virtually. Typically, when we will come out to do an in-person inspection, we will typically ask for whatever records keeping that was required as part of that NPDES permit to be available for inspection. We'll sit down and we'll go through that information before we do the facility walkthrough. But if we're doing a virtual inspection, we may ask for that information ahead of time and for you to provide that to us electronically. Expect a process-based inspection. We will typically start at the raw wastewater to be treated, whether it's domestic wastewater or it's industrial wastewater, and march our way through the treatment process until the treated water is discharged to waters of the state. We typically like to see like a process flow diagram. And we want to see like conveyance systems, any drains, sumps, pits, pumps, tanks, etc., and the outfalls that are investigated. We also want to see treatment systems and the function and maintenance of those treatment systems, and whatever record keeping that's been required for them. So if you have, like, say, a sludge press, is this sludge press being maintained per the manufacturer's specifications? Any ancillary operations such as sludge management. If you had sludge taken out of your facility, where does it go? Does it go to another NPDES permit holder? Who hauls it? How often was it hauled? How much volume was hauled, either in gallons or dry tons? We're going to want to know about sampling procedures, calibration records, proper sample storage. If you have a composite sampler, is the composite sampler maintaining the samples at the proper temperature so you don't compromise the integrity of the sample? Stormwater management. If you're subject to industrial stormwater monitoring and you have parts 4, 5, and 6 of your individual NPDES permit, or you're covered under the general industrial stormwater permit, there are a whole host of records that are not reported to Ohio EPA through the eBiz system under the monthly operating reports, such as visual inspections, facility inspections, annual certifications, training records, or plan updates that the Ohio EPA inspector is going to want to see either electronically beforehand for a virtual inspection or during the site visit as part of the inspection. General housekeeping. This is a big one and ends up being kind of a contentious issue sometimes when we go out to see our sites, is if you have materials that are delivered to your site and say you have things like outside hoppers or outside silos that are receiving raw product, who's responsible for the cleanup if you have a spill? Is that the vendor, the trucker that's bringing in the material, or is that somebody at the facility? Do you have a standard operating procedure for that, and is that being followed? Common program violations. This is kind of the Letterman top 5, I guess. One is going to be unauthorized indirect or direct to waters of the state of wastewater or stormwater without a permit. It's important to know if you've got pipes that go to the environment that you know what goes to those pipes. Many folks that move into a manufacturing facility may move into an older building and it's got floor drains in it. Do you know where those floor drains happen to go? Do you know where that pipe happens to go? Many people think that wastewater is being collected and being directed to the wastewater plant, and it's actually going out to the environment directly without any type of treatment. So if you don't know, it's going to be important to find out. Another common one is installing new wastewater treatment equipment or new conveyance structures like sewers without getting a permit to install. So if you're installing something new to treat your wastewater, you need to obtain a permit to install before you go ahead and do the installation. Making process water changes without notifying Ohio EPA. Many wastewater treatment wastewaters are actually subject to categorical federal standards under 40 CFR 400 to 499, and maybe previously that material was being taken out in a tote and not treated. And at some point, a plant manager or plant engineer made the decision that that wastewater was going to go out to the municipal sewer system or go out to their local little wastewater treatment plant instead of being taken off in totes, and Ohio EPA wasn't notified, and that can have major impacts on what we require to be monitored in your NPDES permit. So when you make those type of changes, it's important to notify Ohio EPA of those changes. Discharging processed wastewater into a septic system. If you have a septic system, the classical tile field, mound system, drip distribution system, where the wastewater is being treated into the ground, discharged into the ground and broken down by the bacteria in the ground, that should be primarily toilet and hand sink waste. If you've got any type of processed water going to it, that's typically a no-no. And you're going to want to make sure that you just have like toilet and hand sink waste going to that system if you have such a system on your property. Okay, with sampling, failure to provide sample results for permitted outfalls. Don't leave something blank in your monthly operating reports. There are data substitution codes in there that you're supposed to use if you are reporting information. And if you were supposed to sample for it, that's typically a violation of your NPDES permit, and you may need to complete a report to explain to Ohio EPA why something wasn't collected that particular month. Failure to ensure the proper sampling, like preservation, the type of sample, whether it's a composite sample or a grab sample, the appropriate test method. This is one that oftentimes gets missed. Various Ohio EPA programs may require the water to be sampled following a specific US EPA method. Well, some US EPA methods may be okay for like the hazardous waste program for reporting, say, groundwater monitoring, but may not be acceptable for NPDES permit monitoring. So the proper methods for sampling particular parameters for NPDES permits are found in 40 CFR 136. So if you don't see that on the list in 40 CFR 136 and you want to use a particular method, it's important that you check with your Ohio EPA inspector to see if that method is acceptable for NPDES permit reporting. And also maintaining records as well as the analysis. Failure to provide notification for exceeding permit limits. Again, like I said, if your permit limit is say 18 and you've got a 21 this month, Ohio EPA is going to look for you to self-report that violation and provide information as to what caused it and what corrective actions have been taken to make sure that it's not repeated. Making sure that monitoring instruments are calibrated. I can't tell you how many times I've gone out to an NPDES permitted site that has loading violations, but not concentration violations, but nobody's calibrated the flow meter in recent memory, and the flow meter is off by a factor of 10. So it's important that if you're relying upon monitoring instruments for whatever that you're collecting, pH, dissolved oxygen, flow, if you're using instruments, that they need to be periodically calibrated. Ohio EPA typically expects those to be calibrated at least annually. And failure to have an operator of record. If you have a sanitary plant that receives toilet and hand sink waste and it discharges to surface waters of the state under an NPDES permit, it's supposed to be seen by a licensed operator. And again, to do the notification if you have a change in that operator or the permit holder. Common program violations with failure to operate and maintain wastewater treatment equipment. If you have a trash trap, when was the last time the trash trap was cleaned out? If you have a sand bed, that sand bed needs to be periodically checked and raked out to make sure that the water is going over it evenly. Are you following manufacturer's maintenance? With sanitary plant records, if you have a sanitary plant and you have this requirement in Part 2, typically Part 2, Item A, with plant records, you need to have a copy of your permit. You need to have your logbook. That's kind of your running diary of the plant, operation and maintenance manuals, operator licenses, or a contract or a service contract if you have a small flow system and you are allowed to have a service contract in lieu of an operator of record. With stormwater plant records, you want to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Keep in mind that this is a living document and needs to be updated at least annually. So when we come out to see your facility, we're going to look for that stormwater pollution prevention plan and see that you have a revision record in it to say that is the plan been updated at least in the last 12 months. Do you have stormwater discharge visual inspections? Do you have your quarterly facility inspections where you've gone around and checked your facility to make sure folks are following standard operating procedures? Your annual certification and training records are also part of that stormwater program. Are you prepared? Understand your permit. And as Olin had mentioned earlier, I can't stress strongly enough, read your permit. If you have a permit, know it and read it. Know the locations of the sewers and drains and where they go. If you don't know, you may need to find out. You may need to do some dye testing or smoke testing to figure out where those pipes actually go. Have records available documenting treatment management and disposal of various waste streams, including sludges. It's important that if you have a person at your facility that is in charge of maintaining all of these records, that you have a backup person for that too. Because Murphy's Law being what it is, the day that I will typically show up at the inspection is the day that the person who's normally in charge of all that information happened to have taken a vacation day. So if I'm there and it's an unannounced inspection, it's important that you kind of have a backup person that can also knows where all that stuff is at and can take me around to see the regulated treatment components. You want to avoid surprises and non-compliance by preparing and educating employees regarding standard operating procedures. Again, like making sure that things are properly swept up and cleaned up. That if something overflows into secondary containment, that is pumped down and taken out as soon as possible. And communicate your problems with your inspector. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Frank Zingales for the Hazardous Waste Program.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the transition here. Give me a minute. All right. Well, John, appreciate, as I mentioned, thanks for the transition. Welcome to everyone. My name's Frank Zingales. I am with the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization, in particular, the Hazardous Waste Program. I've been with the agency for about 24 years, doing hazardous waste compliance, cleanup, and permitting. Currently in the Northeast District office out of Twinsburg, Ohio. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the hazardous waste inspection protocols and some of the common things that we see as a result of those inspections. All right, first I wanted to start with the hazardous waste inspection types. I know this is a little bit repetitive, but I just wanted to provide some nuances specific to the hazardous waste program. The hazardous waste inspections can include planned inspections where we're evaluating certain industry types. And these typically include what we call large quantity generators of hazardous waste or treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. For large quantity generators, we may inspect them once every 3 to 5 years. It may be that compliance schedule may be increased if there are some compliance related issues. With the treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, we inspect them approximately at least once a year. As Olin and John have mentioned, complaint investigations, the hazardous waste program staff do respond to complaints. And sometimes those include participation as part of a multimedia inspection. So we may join other program staff from the air, water, and waste programs. Just to give you some ideas about kind of the traditional inspection protocols that we had utilized. Traditionally, we would conduct unannounced inspections with an on-site visit, but due to the current COVID-19 pandemic, we're now pre-arranging those to conduct the inspection. Generally speaking, we do the inspection using virtual tools or live stream technology as part of the facility walkthrough. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is US EPA also may conduct inspections in Ohio. So it's not uncommon for Region 5's RCRA program to conduct an inspection at a facility here in Ohio. Hazardous waste inspections assess compliance with the hazardous waste, universal waste, and used oil laws and regulations. As you are probably familiar with, hazardous waste includes this cradle-to-grave management concept, from its initial point of generation through its transportation and through its ultimate management at a treatment, storage, and disposal facility. So you're probably wondering what rules apply to a hazardous waste generator. Well, those rules are going to be determined through the amount of hazardous waste that is generated at a facility. There's 3 categories of generators: conditionally exempt, which will soon become the very small quantity generator. They have very few or fewer regulations versus the small and large quantity generators due to the amount of waste that they are generating. For permitted treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, as I mentioned, they're the last link in this cradle-to-grave hazardous waste management system. They do have extensive permit requirements for the management of hazardous waste at the facility, and those management activities are authorized through an Ohio hazardous waste installation and operation permit. For this presentation, I think most of the general applicability will be to the hazardous waste generators. In particular, a small or large quantity generator. So at this point, let me talk about what happens during the course of a hazardous waste inspection. Generally speaking, this is applicable to both the traditional on-site inspections that we had conducted, as well as the virtual inspections that we're now conducting. I'll point out some of the nuances, but with respect to the inspection, we will conduct an opening meeting where we'll identify the purpose of the inspection. We'll also talk with you concerning any type of confidentiality or trade secret claims that may be identified during the course of the inspection. We do have a specific process for identifying those, but we will work with you to address any concerns you may have. In addition, we'll talk about your processes and the waste that are generated from those processes, in particular, the waste generation points, as well as any accumulation areas where they may be stored. And lastly, we'll identify what type of documents are needed to be reviewed. Following the open meeting, we'll conduct a records review. And this is more, this process is probably more applicable to the virtual site visit process now. The records review will include information related to waste evaluation, basically for all 3 generator categories, but specific to small and large quantity generators. Not only will we be looking for waste evaluation information, but we'll review manifests, land disposal restriction forms, inspection logs for hazardous waste containers and emergency equipment. Specific to a large quantity generator, we'll look at the personal training program and contingency plan. If you're storing waste in a hazardous waste tank, we'll review the applicable information for that. And then applicable to all 3 generators, we'll look at the universal waste and used oil management information. Following a records review, we'll conduct a facility walkthrough in the traditional sense. As I mentioned, currently we're doing the virtual site visits using live stream technology, typically the Microsoft Teams application. But as part of that walkthrough, we'll look at process operations and waste generation points and accumulation areas. In addition, any type of emergency equipment that you've designated for your hazardous waste areas. We'll also look at used oil and universal waste accumulation areas. Also, please be aware that during the traditional inspections, we may use a camera to collect photographs, but we'll also, in this virtual site visit process, take screenshots. Now, a word about photos. We will work with the facility if there is a trade secret issue concerning any of these photographs. But generally speaking, we're interested in taking photographs of these waste management areas, waste generation points. Regardless, you have the ability to review these photos and provide feedback if there's any type of trade secret claims that you may wish to assert. Following the facility walkthrough, we'll conduct a closing meeting. And during that closing meeting, we would identify whether there's compliance or any violations that may be found, what type of measures are needed to correct the violations. If there's areas that we need further information from you on, we will discuss the submittal of that information. We'll offer compliance assistance information and pollution prevention opportunities. As Olin and John have talked about, we're interested in assessing compliance, but also providing compliance assistance. So please use your inspector if you need additional information for compliance assistance purposes. You can be prepared for a hazardous waste inspection. First and foremost, evaluate all of your waste. I will come back to this topic because it is definitely an important topic that I wanted to bring to your attention. I have a few slides that we can focus on that evaluation criteria. The other next step is ensuring that your hazardous waste, universal waste, and used oil is properly managed. The other key points I would like to bring to your attention are for small and large quantity generators, ensuring that emergency response and communication equipment is being maintained for your hazardous waste accumulation areas. For a small and large quantity generator, make sure that you are maintaining and have accessible your hazardous waste related documents. These can include waste evaluation information, manifests, inspection logs, personal training records, and contingency plans. At this point, I want to talk about some common violations that we see as part of the hazardous waste inspection process. As I mentioned, waste evaluation is really the cornerstone of the hazardous waste management program. Waste evaluation is the process by which a facility would make a determination as to whether or not a waste is a hazardous waste. Once this evaluation is conducted, you would want to document it and then manage your waste based on that evaluation. Quick review, hazardous waste can include the characteristic or D codes, as well as the listed hazardous waste, which can include the F, K, P, and U codes. I wanted to bring a couple examples to your attention. I realize these examples are demonstrate some of the worst case scenarios, but nonetheless, I wanted to identify or bring to your attention the importance of waste evaluations, since it is the cornerstone of the hazardous waste management program. In this situation, a facility had been open burning paint booth filters. Those paint booth filters were subsequently identified as a hazardous waste. Since they were being open burned, that was identified as unlawful treatment of hazardous waste. In this next situation, the facility has accumulated a significant amount of waste for a long period of time. The waste went unevaluated. When it was determined to be a hazardous waste and had been on site well beyond any type of generator accumulation time periods. Ultimately, the facility had to dispose of the waste as well as clean up the area where the waste was unlawfully stored. Next situation, a facility had failed to evaluate waste and it was transported to a solid waste landfill. After identification, it did need to be removed from the landfill, and as such, that was a costly event to the facility. In this last scenario, facility had generated a caustic or strong sodium hydroxide waste stream, which was not properly evaluated. At the time, the transporter who came to the facility was not aware either of the caustic, strong caustic or sodium hydroxide waste stream. The tanker truck was an aluminum lined tanker truck. The sodium hydroxide and aluminum reacted, causing a pressure buildup and ultimately caused the tanker truck to rupture and release its content to on-site soils. The hazardous waste needed to be cleaned up as well as the area remediated. So as I mentioned, these are some of the consequences of failing to evaluate waste. As I mentioned, I realize that these are the kind of the extreme examples, but I did want to bring to your attention the importance to properly characterize your waste. Moving on to some other common violations that we see during the course of the inspection. These can include hazardous waste container labeling or failure to provide accumulation start dates. Additional container management violations include open containers or containers that are in poor condition. And specific to a hazardous waste accumulation area, aisle space concerns. You would want to make sure that you have adequate aisle space amongst the containers. With respect to universal waste, we do see packaging and labeling violations. In this situation, a facility had failed to properly package their universal waste lamps, as well as label them as used lamps, waste lamps, or universal waste lamps. Another common violation related to the used oil management program would be labeling and releases. For containers of used oil, they need to be labeled with the words used oil, not waste oil, but used oil. If a container or a tank were to develop a leak, the tank or container needs to be addressed, as well as the resulting release cleaned up and appropriately managed. For record-keeping violations at a small quantity or large quantity generator, these can include manifests which have been improperly completed, or the lack of return to generator copy. The return to generator copy is what you're looking for is the designated facility's signature in the last block on the manifest, which is towards the bottom. That signifies that your hazardous waste was received and accepted at the designated facility or the TSDF. Other common violations include weekly container inspections for a small or large quantity generator, or emergency equipment inspections for a small or large quantity generator. Respective to a large quantity generator, personal training program violations include lack of job titles, job descriptions, and type and frequency of training, or failure to provide initial or an annual refresher training. And lastly, for large quantity generators and their contingency plans, these plans are sometimes not updated to reflect changes to facility or personnel. So if there are large quantity generators listening today, please take a look at your contingency plan to make sure that it's updated, and in particular, that your emergency contact list or emergency coordinator list is up to date. So at this point, I'd like to do some live polling. What is the cornerstone of the hazardous waste management program? So please select either container labeling and dating, emergency equipment inspections, waste evaluation, or contingency plan development. Waiting for the information to come in.
So Frank, it looks like the majority of people have responded. So I give it a couple more seconds here, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the polls and share those results.
Great. Glad to hear that people have answered waste evaluation. As I mentioned, the waste evaluation process is integral to the hazardous waste program, so that is the correct answer. All right. Want to provide you with some compliance assistance information related to the hazardous waste program. In the handouts section of today's webinar, you will find a list of some common hazardous waste compliance related information. You can find the links to certain guidance documents in particular. Please take a look at that, see if there's any resources in there that you can utilize. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is Ohio EPA is looking at a effective date or is planning an effective date of October 5th, 2020 for the generator improvement rule, pharmaceutical rule, and airbag rule. With respect to this, as well as other hazardous waste regulatory or management programs, the compliance conference will offer the 2 sessions on September 24th, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, but it talks about the hazardous waste requirements. As I mentioned, on September 24th, it's a part 1 and 2. In addition, on September 29th, the conference will have a session on the upcoming hazardous waste rules. So please take a look at the conference agenda for more information. At this point, I'd like to step away from the hazardous waste program and provide a general summary of what can happen after the inspection, whether it's air, water, or waste. So after the inspection, it's likely your company or your facility will receive a compliance letter or a notice of violation letter. A compliance letter means that the facility is meeting the requirements that were reviewed during the inspection. It doesn't mean compliance with all EPA regulations, but just the inspector's division or program. The other type of letter that the facility could receive is a notice of violation letter. The NOV letter will identify or provide a description of the violations as well as what is needed to be done to correct them. And in addition, it will provide a time frame to correct the violations. If you're not able to correct the violations within that time frame, please reach out to your inspector to discuss a compliance schedule for responding to and correcting the violations. Also realize that either with the NOV or the letter of compliance, an inspection report may accompany those letters. That can include a narrative as well as a checklist from the programs. Please contact your inspector if you have questions about the NOV or if there's some facts that are in the NOV that are wrong. If you don't understand what is needed to correct the violations, or if you have questions on the compliance process or need more time to respond. Obviously, please don't ignore the NOV or wait to the last day to respond. As I mentioned, the inspector is an excellent resource for helping you resolve these violations. A couple more comments about notice of violations or violations in general. Realize that most of these violations can be resolved without legal actions or fines. As far as avoiding enforcement, please utilize some of the information from today's seminar, as well as the do's and don'ts. And if there are violations that are identified, please be timely in correcting them. Specific to the virtual site visit process, realize that you may receive, or you will actually receive, a survey regarding your experience with the process. That allows us, by your response to it, allows us to improve the process. So if you do receive the survey, please take the time to respond to it so we can help improve the process itself. And then lastly, once the violations are addressed, your facility would receive a resolution of violation letter. That's the last step in the process to document how the violations were addressed that had resulted from the initial inspection and subsequent NOV letter. As John and Olin have mentioned, we're interested in compliance. There's a variety of compliance assistance tools that are out there. In particular, the handouts section you can utilize and find some compliance assistance resources. Our Office of Compliance Assistance and Pollution Prevention can be contacted at the numbers as well as the web address. They can provide free, confidential technical assistance or compliance assistance on your issues. The Ohio EPA also maintains a customer support center, which has frequently asked questions that you may find applicable. And then you also have the local district offices and the Ohio EPA staff, which you can find your district office that's applicable to your county. So in summation, this seminar's takeaways, as you've heard from John and Olin, have a plan and designate a backup environmental contact when needed. Have a plan so when the inspector arrives or if you're contacted for a VSV that you know what the process is. Know your processes and permits. Please be honest. Do not speculate. It's okay if you don't have the answer. We will follow up with you to get that type of information. Retain your documents to demonstrate compliance and obviously keep them organized. That is another key takeaway. Please keep your documents organized. And then lastly, if violations are identified, please address them in a timely manner. I think at this point, we'll take questions, and here's our contact information.
Thank you very much, Frank. What an excellent presentation from all three of you, Olin, John, as well. So we have gone over our allotted time. We were to be done at 3, and I apologize for that. Hopefully you found the information useful and worthy of staying on an extra 20-some minutes. For those who are not able to stay on with us, a recording will be available and sent to you as well. So again, thank you, Olin, John, and Frank for your excellent presentations, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey. We value your feedback, and we greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's anything that we can do to assist you further. A certificate of attendance and the recording of this event will also be included via email about a day or so after the session. And just so you know, handouts are provided in this session as well. So you will see our e-binder. This is our agenda for the upcoming sessions, and you can see tomorrow's sessions that we have. The intro to air permitting and reporting in the morning, part 1 and part 2 being in the afternoon starting at 2 o'clock. We have a number of, actually another 3 weeks worth of presentations coming up, so take advantage of those. And for anyone who I think we were able to keep up with most of the questions as they came in with our subject matter experts that we had in the background, but we will also be reaching out to each of you who we did not get back to you with an answer to your question. So that'll be coming here shortly. We're going to close this down for today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you for attending, and have a great day.